Alright, so hello one and all, welcome back to the last Season 2 Part 1 skipped content episode review thingy. I can't think of a good intro for these. But we are here with episode 12 and like the last main video of the year. How was your guys' year? I'll make a whole video talking about that. But for now, let's just get into things. So this episode starts up with the back half of Rudy and Sylphy's interactions in the cave. And for the most part, I'll be honest, the anime kind of adapted most things in it, aside from some minor dialogue changes and a couple skipped things. For one, Rudius does admit to manipulating Sylphy into liking him when they were younger, but obviously he didn't really try to do that when they were older. And the main reason why he couldn't really get like things going like his little guy down there is mainly due to anxiety. As Rudius was ready to go down to business with Sylphy, two people constantly came to mind, Eris and Sarah. Rudius, regressing back into his fear and anxiety, started speaking formally to Sylphy and had the look of terror in his eyes and had been like trembling, and it's not from the cold, he's just so scared. He was so scared that Sylphy would leave and abandon him like the others before, but she stayed by his side. She was certainly shocked by the turn of events, but she never blamed Rudius. She actually blamed herself, rather. But Rudius, meanwhile, kept thinking about his failures with the other two, and it seemed to scare the little guy away. And that's when he tells Sylphy everything about Eris and Sarah and everything in between. And after that, they continued back home after 3 days of travel and just talked about their lives and what they've been up to since. Sylphy found it a little suspicious that Rudius actually enrolled at the academy for the sole purpose of curing his ED, though. But when Sylphy told Ariel that, however, Ariel was shocked. There were rumors going around that Rudius had ED, but to think that they were actually true was quite a surprise. And from there, Ariel insults Rudius intentionally. She was trying to keep control of the conversation. She knew Sylphy would get angry, and when she did, Ariel would skip to like a soothing, apologetic tone and move the conversation forward without revealing her confusion. That was a trick she used quite frequently. However, before she was able to like transition the conversation, Luke argued with Ariel on the subject. He hardly ever did anything like that, and on top of all of that, he was defending Rudius, someone they all thought that he hated. And after that, Luke goes to fetch the bottle as Ariel gives Sylphy tips that she learned as an Asuran noble. Luke returned and gave Sylphy the aphrodisiac, and it was made years ago in the Fidoa region from the petals of the Vatrius flower. The method of production was only known by the mayor of Roa, who had monopolized its sale. However, when the teleportation incident happened, all production basically just ceased. And back when Luke had bought it, it only cost him 15 gold Asuran coins, and so he bought 5 of them, and he had already used 2. Now, however, they go for over 100 gold coins per bottle. It's insane. And Luke lists all the warnings to Sylphy, and Ariel gives her 2 gold coins. This was Ariel's entire allowance for the month. And to explain that, basically they had secured some financial resources and had a good stash of money. But those were Ariel's war funds reserved for like future plans. Ariel and Luke were pretty terrible with their money, and so they agreed to like strictly limit their access to their funds. And after that, Sylphy had gone to Sharia's commerce district to find a liquor store. And then she and Rudy got down to business. And I don't know, to be honest, there really isn't much to talk about with this scene. Some episodes take place over the span of like 100 pages. Meanwhile, half of this episode covers maybe 7 pages. It's a pretty thorough adaptation. The only things that we miss are some internal dialogue from Sylphy. When she chokes on her alcohol because it's too strong, she's annoyed that Rudy laughed at her for it, and when he warmed up her drink, it reminded them of Buena Village when they first met, because Rudius like dried her up. He used a very similar spell. And the weird food stuff that she brought, me and a friend were watching the episode and we're like, what food did Sylphy bring? Like, she had these weird, like, it looked like popcorn or something. I don't, she had like 2 bowls of something and we had no idea what they were. As it turns out, it was spicy nuts and smoked meat. 2 things that Rudius already had on him. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you get it. You get it. I don't think you like it, but you get it. But then the more that Sylphy drank and drugged, she found herself noticing parts of Rudius that she hadn't focused on before, which, I don't know, I kind of just like that detail. It's kind of cute. It's, is it realistic? I don't know, love, but I don't know, it sounds realistic enough. Finally, though, apparently Rudius had been, like, very rough with her. Like, when they were doing it, like, he was unpleasantly rough. And like, to be fair, I mean, she drugged the hell out of him. So it might not have felt amazing for her first time, which Luke did warn her about. It's like, hey, you're picturing this like fairy tale-esque first time. Not happening, not at all. But I don't. To be fair, she was drugged too, so maybe it did feel good. I don't know, but it's definitely not what she imagined her first time to be. But after that, the morning after, it did go a bit differently compared to the anime. In the light novel, Sylphy is seen lying next to Rudy as compared to in the anime where she like stepped out of the room and there was like anxiety shown from Eris. Just a little bit of tension going. I like both versions of the scenes. They both do their job for their own reasons. The anime allows us to have like anxiety for a second, while the book reinforces the idea that Sylphy will never leave Rudy's side. But this is where things get a little weird. The anime actually skips 2 different stories in favor of what we got after the bed scene. And so for a moment, we're jumping to volume 10. This is volume 9, right? Season 2, part 1 covered 7, 8, and 9. That's what the books covered. That's what they were. We're going to volume 10 for a little bit. We're skipping 2 side stories from volume 9, 2 kind of important side stories, and we're skipping like half a chapter into volume 10 just to show the scene, which is kind of weird, but at the same time I get it. But the scene between Luke, Ariel, and Sylphy Rudius went about the same. What they're talking about, like at the very end of the episode, Rudius thinks that Ariel's charisma could be due to her being a blessed child, and although that's possible, I don't think that her effects would work on him if that's the case. I've even brought up the idea in the past, but again, we know that curses don't work on Rudius, and because curses and blessings are supposedly, according to Hitogami, which he could be lying, they are one and the same. And so it's hard to say if blessings work on Rudius, because if they are the same, then why would they? It wouldn't make any sense. So it could just be that Ariel is just like has max charisma stats, basically. I think that's how I described it exactly last time. But anyway, as they discuss Rudius joining Ariel, despite his lack of interest in getting involved in politics, Rudius goes like, I don't know, Luke doesn't seem to be my biggest fan. I don't know if I should really join. But Luke is like, well, that's because you're a thick-headed idiot who doesn't understand how women feel, you dumbass. But then Sylphy then quickly claps back and is like, okay, yeah, you're a piece of shit who toys with girls' feelings. That's word for word what Sylphy said. Like, it's insane. Sylphy is a bad bitch, you know? But I'm not too sure if I've said this before, but it really does feel like that they have Sylphy and Luke have a brother-sister relationship, which I think is really cool, and we'll see more of that later, as, you know, because Rudius proposed to Sylphy at the end of the season, they're obviously going to get married. And so it is interesting to see Luke's kind of role in that wedding, and I think that it's really cool, and I'm excited to see that. That'll be pretty cool. Sorry, I hope that's not a spoiler. It's not really that big of a spoiler. Just I really like the relationship, Sylphy and Luke. It's really nice and wholesome, even though she just called him a shithead or something. It's fun. That's what siblings do. But anyway, other than that, Rudius offers to actually work for Ariel, but Ariel just flat out rejects him, saying that his power is too much for her to contain. But to be honest, that's probably her way of getting him to trust her. Like, by being this kind to him, you know, it's like, oh no, you're too much for me. Yeah, I couldn't possibly. You're too great and mighty, right? That's probably just her doing that, just gloating his ego, stroking it, floating. I don't know the phrase. I don't know, making his ego bigger, which doesn't really work for Rudius. But anyway, now let's go back to volume 9, because next we have, so everything from here on is 100% not shown in the anime. So we have side story Sylphiette part 0. This is the part that you're going to be interested in, plus the title. I don't know what I'm titling this, but I'm pretty sure it's alluding to this story and the next one. Buckle up and stay tuned, kiddos and adultos. But this story shows Sylphy's entire story, the entire story from her point of view up until now. And it's crazy. And so I'll go over this now, and then afterwards we'll be reading, I'll be talking about anyway, the extra chapter, The Mad Dog Rages. I'm very excited about this. So let's start with side story Sylphiette part 0. The night that she and Rudius had slept together, she had a dream about the past. It was her third year at Renoa University of Magic. Linny and Presena had settled down after their defeat, and Princess Ariel had secured the position of Student Council President. At this point, they decided to look outward for more followers. It was then that they landed on the man known as Quagmire Rudius. The rumors of his backstory seemed way too far-fetched, even for Sylphy, and she knew that they were true. After a short discussion, Sylphy had convinced Ariel to send him a letter. Of course, Ariel wasn't letting Sylphy reunite with her childhood friend just out of the good of her heart, although she did still care for Sylphy, but her main goal was to have Rudius recruited on her side, of course. Although, a couple of concerns. Rudius supposedly had ties to the Boreas family, their number one enemy. However, he appeared to have cut ties with them since the displacement incident. The second issue is one that Luke brought up. With a chest as flat as Sylphy's, there's no way that she'd be able to seduce him to her side. Luke has always been harsh with Sylphy, but he always reminds her, it's like, it's because of your flat chest that we can be friends, right? And it's, I don't know, again, it's the very brother-sister kind of relationship. Not that brother and sisters talk about each other like that's going a little weird, but it's the idea, it's the energy that they kind of have with each other. But anyway, a few months later, Rudius had arrived on campus. When Sylphy laid eyes on him, she thought that he looked a little gloomy, a bit of like a bad boy, well trained and downright handsome, and she was feeling pretty hot herself. Sylphy was about to go up to Rudius and strike up a conversation until she saw that he wasn't alone. Behind Rudius clung a blonde elf who reminded Sylphy of her father for whatever reason. He didn't try to push her off either, so it was clear. They must have been in a relationship. A couple minutes later, she was called over to have that quick match against Rudius. This gave her some time to think. Just because he was in a relationship didn't mean that she couldn't talk to him and catch up, right? She was excited to have the first conversation with Rudius in 8 years. But he didn't remember her. Although she remembered she was wearing thick glasses and had white hair and wore male clothing, and it'd been many years, right? She can just pull him aside later and take off the glasses. But what if he just didn't remember? Like, at all? Like, well, now she couldn't take them off. After the one-sided match, she was in awe of Rudius. He had totally crushed her and moved far, far ahead of her. Rudius apologized to her, which she didn't really understand, and once he left, she remembered that he hadn't recognized her at all. She later then cried alone. A month later, the entrance ceremony took place and she had finally seen Rudius in his school uniform, and he looked pretty sharp now. Ariel, Luke, and her decided to not take things too aggressively, considering that he didn't remember her. They tried to justify their opinions on the matter, but for the most part, they just seemed like that they were upset with Rudius for not remembering, which it made Sylphy a little happy, right? It felt like that she had allies, I guess. But anyway, after the ceremony, Sylphy had been thinking things over while sitting in class with Ariel. The princess was expected to be an example for the other students, so she had to maintain like superb grades. During the combined magic class, Sylphy had noticed that they taught things a bit worse than how Rudius had taught. With the knowledge from Rudy, she was able to keep up with the classes just fine, but Luke and Ariel really couldn't. However, when she tried to teach them it in the same way that Rudy taught her, it just made them even more confused. And so Ariel had requested Sylphy to grab some books to help teach them, and that's when she ran into Rudius in the library for that first time. Sylphy didn't know what to say, but Rudius apologized once more for embarrassing her during the test, and looking back, she thought that it must have been embarrassing for her, huh? I mean, she didn't really care at the time because she was thinking about other things, but she wonders that if it's partially why Luke and Ariel are upset about the whole situation. To have their prized guard be beaten so swiftly must have hurt them a little bit. Sylphy was sure that she could beat sane-tier sword fighters and magicians just fine, but Rudius was on a whole other level. Plus, when he said that he had been to the demon continent, that baffled her. Not only did he come back, but he also began searching for his family after that and is now researching the teleportation incident altogether. It was insane. Then we jump to that night when Rudius had taken the path through the girls' dormitory and Goliath had jumped him. Sylphy explains that sometime in the past when they had other servants wash Ariel's panties, some male students had stolen 4 of them. 3 of them were sold while 1 was kept by the perpetrator. The reason why you'd sell them is for a couple reasons. 1, they were just Asuran grade royal panties. They were just really well made and they obviously sold for a lot of money. But 2, it's because they were worn by an Asuran princess. The prices skyrocketed even further than that. And so the duty had then fallen onto Sylphy's lap. She would just wash Ariel's clothing when Sylphy washed hers. And to hide her identity and gender, Sylphy would wear the same kind of panties as Ariel, only in a different color. But anyway, back to Rudius and Goliath. At first, Sylphy had kind of just watched the event unfold from the window. Not because that she was nervous or anything, but to see what Rudius would do to them. It reminded her of the events back in Buena when Rudius had saved Sylphy. However, as the event played out, it almost seemed as though Rudius was the one being bullied. She had then leapt down from the balcony and approached the group. What the girls didn't seem to notice was that Rudius had planted his feet onto the ground using stone magic. And what was the reason for that, though? Right? Maybe there wasn't one. I mean, it's not like his feet would be shaking or anything right now. But then she thought again, and back to when Rudius stood up for her against Somal and the other bullies. His legs were shaking. And after that, when he found out that Sylphy was a girl, he trembled slightly and commented that Sylphy was really cold to him. He was scared and thought that she hated him. Kind of like Eris, Sylphy had been picturing Rudius like some kind of god, someone who isn't affected by a simple man's problem. But that really isn't true, and that's why Sylphy stepped forward and helped. In the past, which was actually shown at some point in the manga, Sylphy's father, Laws, had asked her a question. Sylphy, are you just going to sit around and let him protect you forever? And the answer was, no, of course not. From there, she helped him and explained the rules about walking through the girls' dorm at night. As Rudius spoke here, she noticed that he was acting a bit different from before. The stiffness in his voice had disappeared. Rudius was wary of Fitz until now, but because of this event, it seemed like that the two of them could actually create a deeper relationship with one another. And that's kind of like the difference between Sylphy and Eris, right? Where Sylphy, they both picture Rudius as this god. The difference between them is that Sylphy kind of took him down a peg. She realized that he isn't a god, and they can stand shoulder to shoulder, back to back, defending each other, right? And although Eris does have the same goal, it's not that she had to take Rudius down a peg to realize that he was human. It's that she is trying to reach him. And so that's kind of just the fundamental difference between Sylphy and Eris. One is trying to reach Rudius's level, while the other realizes that Rudius isn't actually as high of a level that it seems like he's at. It's hard to word this. And so she realizes that he can come down to her level, or they can meet halfway rather than Eris doing all the work to go up there. It's the same kind of love, but it's a different love, but it's the same, it's love, but it's a different kind of love, but it's the same kind of appreciation. But anyway, as the two of them parted ways, Sylphy looked down at the panties that she had retrieved from Rudius. And as it turns out, they weren't Ariel's panties. They were hers. And so she was very embarrassed about the whole situation. After that, Sylphy woke up, which does be a little anticlimactic, right? I said that it's the whole story. But from here, we really did get Sylphy's part 1, 2, 3, and 4 were her point of views, right? Part 0 is everything before that. And so put it together, we get a whole Sylphy POV, something that the anime kind of covers, but ultimately doesn't, I think. I think that it does fail to cover the Sylphy POV in its entirety, especially, part 0 with the introduction of Sylphy, or the reintroduction, I guess. But you put all the parts together and it becomes one whole, POV that I don't know, fits the character. What's the word? I don't remember. Doesn't matter. Sylphy at part 0, but that's not all of part 0. I know you thought I was gonna go to the mad dog part, but there's still a little bit more. Sylphy woke up, right? And so she was a little sore from that night, right? After Rudius and her got jiggy with it, But her mind soon began to race with some naughty thoughts. But anyway, the two of them talked, and Rudius thanked her for helping him. And in her words, she says, "The dream I had been chasing all these years had finally come true. From now on, Rudy and I were a team." And hooray! What a happy ending. I love it. Unlike the last 2 times we got a POV like this, right? The Eris POV was very sad and depressing. We found out that she had anxiety and everything. It was very sad and it was awful. And then there was Sarah's, which was very similar, actually. It was very sad and awful, and she cried a lot, both of them. Did Eris cry at all? I don't know if she did, but Sarah did, and it's sad. But this one is so happy. There was blood involved, though, but for good reasons, I guess. But anyway, speaking of one of the 2 old POVs, I was deciding whether or not I wanted to add the next story into this, because I know that this, season 2, part 2 was going to cover it anyway. But, why not? I can't really draw out any kind of, a cliffhanger with these episodes, and so I might as well let this one count. At least I can have a cliffhanger for all of you, something that the anime doesn't show that I can talk about. So we're going to go into extra chapter, The Mad Dog Rages. Buckle up. The Sword Sanctum was in the deep north of the central continent, covered in snow year-round. This is where the first sword god had chosen to establish a school. In modern times, it was the go-to destination for any swordsman and woman if they wanted to seriously grow stronger. Exceptional students were being made here each and every year, but there were 3 true prodigies at the Sword Sanctum currently. The first was the daughter of the current sword god, Nina Farion. She was currently 18 years old and had reached Sword Saint by 16 and was expected to become Sword King before 20 and Sword Emperor by 25. The second was Nina's cousin, Gino Britz. He was a second son of the Britz family, which was a branch of the Falian clan that led the Sword God School. He was currently 14 years old and had become Sword Saint at just 12. There was no telling who would grow stronger, Gino or Nina. And lastly, there was Eris Grey Rat. She was 17 years old and struck terror into the hearts of everyone that she encountered. She was a mad dog who would viciously savage anyone who annoyed her. 2 years ago, she had come to the school with her teacher, Sword King Ghislaine. She was utterly uncompromising in every aspect, and every single day, she subjected herself to a brutal, death-defying training routine, torturing her own body relentlessly. So now let's jump back about 2 years ago, in the year of K421. Eris had followed Ghislaine's wake as they had stepped into the Sword Sanctum's ephemeral hall for the audience with the Sword God. The hall was lined with high-ranking students of the Sword God style, all Sword Saints or better. Nina and Gino were among them, and ignoring the others who surrounded her, Eris did not bow her head as she approached the Sword God, much less kneel. And the first thing that came out of her mouth was, "I'm not interested in fighting a lightweight like you." Everyone was baffled and wondered just who the hell this woman thought that she was. But Gal Farion told them to sit and be quiet. He was going to cut this woman down, that's what they all thought. But they soon realized. Gal was grinning. He understood exactly why Eris was here, and so he asked, "Tell me, who is it that you want to kill?" And Eris immediately answered without any hesitation, "The Dragon God. The Dragon God Orsted." All the students knew the name Dragon God, but not Orsted. Gal then burst into laughter, slapping his own knee. Well, compared to Orsted, I guess I am quite a lightweight. You want to kill that old bastard, huh? And here I thought I was the only one." His laughter was cut short when he said, "But you know, talk's cheap. Can you do it?" And without a moment to spare, no doubt or hesitation, Eris said, "I will." Gal then gestured to Gino to test Eris' strength. He said that Gino is soft, but he's not half bad with the sword. 2 other Sword Saints tossed wooden swords to both Eris and Gino, and in an instant, Eris charged forward, hitting the wooden sword out of Gino's hand and landing a second hit that knocked him out cold. Everyone except for 4 people in the room were furious. That was just plain cheating. Gino wasn't even looking and she struck him. But one Sword King, 2 Sword Emperors, and the Sword God saw it very differently. He goes, See what I mean? The kid is soft, isn't he? And after that, Nina was up to bat. Gal told Eris, "Nothing wrong with sneak attacks, girl, but I'd like to see how you handle someone who's ready for you." And when one of the Sword Saints tossed Nina her wooden sword, she noticed that it was oddly heavy. It had a metal core. They wanted to kill Eris, and Nina simply nodded. One of the Sword Saints called the match to start, and the 2 girls charged forward with each other and their swords met. Eris' sword shattered instantly into 1,000 pieces. Nina won. All she had to do was land a ruthless strike on her head and Eris was done for. But then, Nina took a fist to the face. The next moment, Nina was underneath Eris and was pelted by at least a dozen punches, leaving her nose broken, teeth shattered, and unconscious. After that, Eris picked up Nina's suspiciously heavy sword and kicked her over to where Gino lay and said, "Do you have anyone who isn't soft here?" After a moment, Gal simply said, "Look, sorry girl, I guess I underestimated you a bit. I'll play with you myself." Everyone else was like, "Whoa, this might be overkill, sir." Ignoring their words though, Gal picked up his sword. Eris then dropped the wooden sword, dashed back for her own, and unsheathed it. Gal notices something about Eris' sword and says, "Oh, hey, nice sword you got there. Ain't that one of Julian's?" Eris is like, I don't know. A member of the Meagard tribe gave it to me. He goes, ah, all right. Well, here's a Julian too. The sword god drew his sword deliberately, almost to show it off. The blade shone with a faint golden light. It was one of the 7 sword god blades and was one of the 48 magic swords created by Julian Herisko, a legendary craftsman of the demon realm. From the bones of the king dragon Kajukt, it was known as Windpipe. He held it loosely in his hand, letting it dangle downward. He almost never handled a naked sword, and so this was a first for many students. Gal then said, all right, let's go. At that very moment, Eris was sent flying through the air, crashing through the doors of the hall, and kept going, landing somewhere in the snow outside. Gal stood exactly where Eris was just a moment ago, perfectly still, with his sword extended. No one in the room had seen him even move. They all thought that Eris was dead, until they heard noises coming from outside. They wondered how she survived a direct hit from the sword god, but they realized that he obviously went easy on her. From here, they'd simply banish her and move on. Or so they thought. Gal then said, Ghislaine, tend to Eris's injuries. As of this moment, she is a sword saint. I'll train her, starting tomorrow. No one was really happy about this, and some began to argue. Like, that's absurd! The Sword Saint is a special title granted only to those who master the Sword of Light technique. That girl's nothing more than a wild, vicious... And then Gal pointed his sword at the person complaining. She took down 2 kids who knew the Sword of Light. It's good enough for me. You don't get to be a sword god by memorizing something or other. I'm a special guy, but there's nothing special about my title. So why should yours be any different? The Sword Saint fell silent. He was speaking out of jealousy. All those his rank knew that such emotions only slowed their blades. However, Gal knew the truth. The sword god's combat style was fueled by raw emotion and desire. When used properly, even the ugliest of motivations could make your sword all the more deadly. And so, as of that day, Eris was now a sword saint. Now let's jump back to the present day. At the time, anyway, in the year K422. Nina hates Eris, always has. Eris was nothing but a wild dog who, when her sword wasn't up to the task, would lash out with her fists like a child. She thought that such behavior was unworthy of a sword saint. For 2 years, she had barely spoken with Eris and worked with Gino to ensure that no one would give her the time of day, but that didn't really mean much considering Eris never made any attempts to get close with any of the other students either. She would spend most of her time training single-mindedly with Ghislaine. The two even slept together. The only words that Eris and Nina exchanged were insults when they were paired up together during the mandatory monthly general training sessions. The two of them were evenly matched in these fights. Nina believed that she had won more than she had lost, though. As long as there were proper rules in place, where a dropped sword or damaged sword meant the duel was over, she thought that she was superior to Eris. However, it would take a little bit longer for her to realize that these very thoughts were the softness that her uncle had identified in her. For now, she was still lacking in real experience, unlike Eris. Eris and Nina were rivals in the eyes of those around them, but as far as Eris was concerned, Nina wasn't even worth thinking about. One day in late summer, Nina was speaking with a few girls around her age, and the topic of boys and romance was brought up. Nina had devoted her entire life to the sword, and so it was hard for her to imagine herself settling down with someone, especially now that she has Eris to keep up with. Speaking of which, Eris had coincidentally been walking by. She had steam coming off of her and had just come out of the tempering hall, which clearly she had just finished up a training session. Nina found this to be the opportunity to make fun of her some more. Do you do anything except train? You'll be a virgin until the day you die, I'm sure. Too bad your sword can't keep you warm at night. She used these words specifically because she knew that if someone said that to her, it would hurt her, and it would surely hurt Eris too. Except Eris said the last thing that any of them thought would come out of her mouth. Eris snorted with laughter and said, yeah, sorry, but I'm not a virgin. Clearly taken aback, Nina just asked who would ever sleep with her. And now Eris rarely talked, but for whatever reason she went on and on about this guy named Rudius. They grew up together, traveled across the demon continent, they fought the dragon god, and Rudius had even hurt him. And she spoke of how they spent a night together. She wanted to get strong for his sake. Nina had been told by Gal that Orsid is protected by some sort of holy dragon aura. Surely this random guy couldn't hurt him, right? And Eris says, hey no, I'm not lying, and Rudius isn't ordinary. That's why I'm not fit to be with him right now, you know? I've got to get way stronger. She clenched her fist, her face full of determination, turned around and walked right back into the tempering hall to train once more. Nina watched her go in an astonished silence. Eris was the last person she would have expected to be ahead of her in that department. The news about this boyfriend had left her reeling. And so on Nina's next day off, she headed for the nearest town where she paid an information broker to look for info on Rudius. She expected nothing to come up, but she was wrong. It didn't take long for him to put together a report. The report went over general details and accomplishments that Rudius has made throughout his life. I don't really need to get into it, because at the end of the day, Nina realized, yeah, he's real. But, so what if he killed a dragon? He couldn't be that good, right? And then an evil little plan hatched in her head. What if she went over to Rudius, beat him up, and dragged him back here as her prisoner? Surely nothing could go wrong with that, right? Absolutely nothing. But then, the very next day, she packed her things, leapt on a horse, and set off for the Renoa Kingdom. It would be only a 3-month journey there and back. Nothing compared to the shame and despair on Eris's face, however. God, the pettiness is insane. It's unrivaled. But when she arrived at the university, she expected a lot of scrawny losers, basically. She looked down on magicians. Just because they can say a few words and, flick their wand, didn't mean that they could compete with, raw skill that it took to become a sword master. But to her surprise, there were lots of strong-looking people here. Lots of beast folk, too. Sure, there were some people that fit her description, but there were a lot more, respectable-looking fighters at the academy. Maybe her prejudice was wrong. She then began asking around where this Rudius would be, and the beastfolk man that she asked said that he was looking for him as well and knew where he might be. And they found Rudius as the man challenged him to a duel. Rudius goes sorry, I got piano lessons. I can't really fight you right now. Ignoring his declination of a duel, the beastfolk attacked Rudius and swiftly got beat in no more than 3 seconds. Ignoring Nina, Rudius turned around and left. She eventually learned that Rudius had headed off to the library, and when she arrived just outside of the library, she found a line of at least 30 other beastfolk all waiting to fight Rudius. Respecting the rules, she went to the back of the line, and that's when he appeared. The Demon King Batagati. Not that she knew his identity at the time, though. He wanted to challenge Rudius, but all the people in line, including Nina, yelled at him to wait his turn, until one man said, "You want to go first, big man? Then you'd better defeat everyone here before you." Batagati's like, "Oh, alright, I like the sound of that." And within moments, everyone, including Nina, was completely crushed by Batagati's might. She did fare better than the others, but not even her long sword of light could penetrate his skin. Plus, he had even shattered her sword. Immediately after that, Rudius showed up, the two exchanged a few words, and headed off for a different location. There, she saw the entire fight go down. Not that there was really much to see anyway. In one shot, Rudius had completely destroyed the Demon King. The next thing she knew, Nina was headed back to the Sword Sanctum. Rudius had defeated an opponent that Nina couldn't even compete with, and Eris wanted to ascend to his level. When she made it back, Nina saw Eris swinging her sword with a single-minded focus, and she felt something that she hadn't felt before. After that day, Nina Farion had turned over a new leaf. She devoted herself to training far more than she ever had before, and now began to carry a second sword in case her first one was ever broken again. She stopped mocking and harassing Eris and grew distant from the other girls her age, not that she had been especially close with them to begin with. And when she looked at Eris, whose determination never seemed to waver, her gaze was not so harsh as it had once been. In time, the two of them would become true rivals. But that is a story for another time. And rumor has it that the sword god had been sharpening his sword excitedly after hearing that the Demon King Batagati had shown up in the area. However, he was disappointed to hear that he had been defeated. And that is the side story, The Mad Dog Rages. And that is the end of Season 2, Part 1. We will see Season 2, Part 2, I think in April, if I remember correctly. Yeah, not a bad season. It had its issues, obviously, having an entirely different director and, team producing the show. Obviously, things are going to be a little bit different. And it is a shame, the visual quality difference. And I've talked about, my issues with it in a video, how to fix the anime. But that's a lot of hypotheticals. What really does fix the anime? Animation aside, I don't really care too much about that. It does look iffy. But that's whatever, right? These slow moments don't have to look iffy so long as the actual action pieces in Season 2, Part 2, so long as that fight looks good, I don't think that anybody will really complain, right? So long as that one individual fight in season 2, part 2 looks good, we're good, right? But I don't know. We'll see. A lot of people hope that they were just saving their animation, like, I don't know, just their efforts for season 2, part 2, but especially season 3. I don't even know what studio will be doing season 3. It's hard to imagine it's going to be Studio Bind, even though they were made for Mushoku Tensei. It's hard to imagine the same team keeping up with it. I don't know. But regardless, overall, like, animation aside, right, I think that the season felt rushed, right? I believe the common sentiment is anime fans feel like that it was way too slow. Meanwhile, light novel readers think that it was like way too fast. And it's very difficult to really do a show like Mushoku Tensei in a 12 episode format. I talk all about that, how it should really just be a longer series, right? Make it 50 episodes a season or something, right? Go, Brotherhood, the Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood with that, right? That had like 48 episodes or something, 52. It was weird. It was a very odd number, right? Like, make the seasons how long you need it to be. I know it's a lot more easier said than done, but whatever. The main issue, the point is, my issues with season 2 was how much it skipped. Because it did. It skipped a lot of little stuff. This part, like season 2, part 1, my skip content was much shorter on average than season 1 skip content, but that's for a couple reasons. One, I cut out like half of the content, right? There's like what I talked about, right? I covered the anime again just because we needed a recap. It's been a while since season 1 came out, and I also went over the the manga, and then I went into the light novel in excessive detail. And so I basically went over the same part 3 times in one video. And so that's one reason why these, like, season 2 part 1 is shorter, is because I obviously just talk about the light novel, and it's a lot less detailed. It's still informative, I think, but I don't go word for word like I did in season 1. But the other reason is because although there wasn't necessarily a whole lot skipped, it was a lot of smaller scenes that were skipped. But all those small scenes come together to really flesh out certain characters and, I don't know, just expand upon the world, right? We obviously skip a lot of history and, like, mechanics and a lot of stuff. Like, I visit the Mushoku Tensei Reddit quite often, and every week it's like, hey, how does this work? How does this make sense? How does, what's this about? And blah, blah, blah. And it's stuff that the anime skipped. It's explanations that the anime skipped. Sometimes it's explanations that the anime already went over, but people just don't understand it. But whatever. I think that's a them issue, not an anime issue. But the problem is, like, the anime does skip over things that are important that people wonder about. And overall, it was okay. It wasn't better than season 1. Will season 2, part 2 be any better? I hope so. Oh my god, I do. I don't want it to be bad. I think that just the actual content itself will be more interesting, as well as I just hope that the quality is better. And I hope that they're able to adapt everything in full. In a way, I almost think that they should be trying to go with 2 books per 12 episodes. That would probably make things a lot better. That would make things much more slice of life. But I do think that's worth it. But at this point, it doesn't really matter. I'm just talking to talk. I enjoyed season 2, part 2, part 1. I hope I enjoy season 2, part 2. I did enjoy it, right? There were, again, times that I just a little iffy about. I've complained a little bit during these skip content videos, but overall, I think that it is a good season. I think that it's pretty good. Pretty good, I think. It's okay. And so for those who want action in Mushoku Tensei again, don't worry. Season 2, part 2, probably starting like halfway, we'll probably have action again. Maybe even a little bit sooner than that. We'll get action. But that's kind of it for me. I enjoyed making these videos. These were a lot of fun. I tried out a different format this time around. Season 1, part 1 was a lot more me on a monitor trying to remember my lines, but now I get to just read it from a teleprompter. It's awesome. And I'm holding a microphone now, and so the audio balancing is going to be awful. I'm so sorry. So I don't know if this is more enjoyable to watch, but this is so much more easier to record, and it's much easier to edit. It's insane. I'm sure you guys have some issues with this, so I'm going to try and make it even better next time around. And if you enjoyed the series and this episode, give it a like and subscribe for more Mushoku Tensei content, because I have some surprises for you next year. And I will see you next year. Goodbye.